He stands alone in a glass-walled room that hums like a sealed aquarium at night. Fluorescent light lays a sterile glaze across tempered glass, steel hinges, and a waist-high tower of monitors. Eddie Tipton watches the cursor blink on a console that is not connected to anything beyond these walls, at least not in the way the world imagines connections. He knows this room, its rules of entry, its twin locks, its overlapping cameras that watch everything and, sometimes, nothing at all. He designed pieces of this ritual. He taught others how to believe in it. Outside, Des Moines is late autumn cold. In here, the breath of the machines is warm and orderly. Randomness is a faith, he thinks, and faith survives only when its keepers never look too closely. He was hired to keep it sacred, to verify time, to guard the draw systems, to maintain a generator that spits numbers with the serene inevitability of rainfall. He is paid well enough to live comfortably, not extravagantly, yet Eddie's life has swollen into something larger than his salary suggests. A sprawling house with angles and alcoves he only half uses, a private theater where sound wraps around him like a velvet curtain, a court where the thump of a basketball echoes into rooms filled with new furniture smell. When a colleague once asked how he managed it, he'd smiled and mentioned old money and Texas ground that leaks oil into the bones. People accept an explanation that flatters the world they want. Tonight, he is here under a simple pretense: maintenance, a time change, the quiet duty no one cares to witness. The thought arrives like a rumor he tells himself he will never repeat. What if chance could be guided without being strangled? What if the river could be nudged a degree and still call itself a river? He studies lines of code the way a locksmith studies the light inside a keyway. There is nothing theatrical in what he considers. No weighted balls, no hidden hand reaching into a clear globe. Only instructions, quiet as dust, telling a machine what to do when a clock says a certain date and the evening curls to a certain hour. He reminds himself he is not the greedy sort. He likes puzzles. He likes the hush that comes over a mind when it solves a thing nobody else knew was a question. Harm, as he frames it, is a loud word in a quiet room. The jackpot will go to someone. Why not to a pattern he understands? Why not to a friend who knows how to keep a straight face? Even as he thinks it, he senses the soft slide of a line being crossed, but the cameras blink their 1-second blinks, and the code is small enough to vanish when told. He tells himself this isn't theft so much as choreography. You still watch the dance. You just know where the foot will fall. He leaves the room as he enters. Badge, log, polite nod to a guard whose life runs on checklists. The parking lot is an empty grid of frost and sodium lamps. He sits in his car, breath feathering the windshield, the heater beating back the cold in sighs. The idea is no longer a rumor. It clicks into place like a well-cut key. In the quiet between the heater's breaths, he imagines a number that will one day call his name, and wonders if, when it does, anyone will hear the whisper his conscience makes. By December, the light has thinned. In a quick trip just off the interstate, the air smells of coffee and window cleaner, and hot dogs rolling patiently under lamps. A heavy-set man in a dark hoodie pulls the door and lets the bell declare him. The camera above the register records a strip of moments: the swipe of a sleeve, the glint of a foil wrapper, the exchange of low words between clerk and customer. The hoodie man buys 2 hot dogs because ordinary is a garment he understands how to wear, and a ticket that will go on living long after the chili stain has dried. When he turns, the hood shadows his face at the precise angles a lens can't solve. Outside, where glass no longer watches, the hood comes down and the hat comes off. An SUV waits with the patient look of a car that knows only ignition and destination. The ticket, still warm from the register, rides beside him. Numbers sleep on its surface like coordinates to a place that does not exist yet. He does not let the win land in his mind. That is not his role. He is not the winner. He is the architect. The bridge is only beautiful because people can cross it. Winter gathers. In a conference room with a podium and 3 microphones, the CEO of the Iowa Lottery asks the state to check glove compartments and crumpled receipts and junk drawers where small fortunes hide among bent paper clips. A month passes, then 2. By the 3rd reminder, check your tickets please, the story has turned strange. 6 months in, the prize remains unclaimed. He notes the timelines the way a chess player notes the clock. A year? Number. They have a year. The first call arrives with the right numbers and the wrong man. A retired attorney with the raspy elegance of a practiced voice says he bought the ticket but cannot travel. His heart, his valve, the distance. excuses as thin as the paper he hopes to cash. Eddie does not make that call. He does not need to. Somewhere, someone else is improvising, and the tune is off-key. The attorney stumbles. He bought it himself. He did not. He represents a client who cannot be named. He is a trustee of something that sounds like wealth but smells like dust. Names shift like light underwater. Canada, New York. A trust formed in Belize. A president whose name is spelled incorrectly on the line where care should live. He listens to it play out on the evening news, the way a magician might watch an amateur drop his deck. The rules demand a face. The claimants bring a mask. The lottery says no. He hears the laughter in a break room the next morning, people chuckling over the audacity of it all. Who walks away from $16 million? Who arrives with 40 minutes left on a one-year clock and leaves with empty hands? He smiles in the right places and lets his eyes do what quiet eyes do best. Nothing. The ticket that should have shouted goes silent, and for a moment the scheme tastes like victory, until silence begins to sound like a question that won't stop asking who and why and where the body of the truth has been hidden. Time slides. Investigators knock on doors in Quebec and New York and find only the legalese of indirection. The federal agents are busy with louder catastrophes. The state is left to chase a whisper through international glass. Files are opened and closed with the soft thud of defeat. The story cools. He returns to his routines, code reviews, security briefings, the dull theater of meetings where people argue about policies they barely understand. The draw room keeps breathing. His colleagues joke about Bigfoot and hunting season and the weather's latest opinion. He keeps his smile gentle, his days punctual, his badge unremarkable. Years later, 4 whole years, enough time to plant an orchard and wait for its first fruit. A young attorney inherits the cold case, a man with the posture of someone used to being underestimated. Eddie learns the name the way one learns about a new neighbor, casually, without moving the curtain. The lawyer asks an old question. If we cannot find the winner, can we find the buyer? He turns to a surveillance tape the public has never seen. The tape shows a man in a hoodie buying hot dogs and a ticket. It shows a car that looks like a type of car. Its grill a suggestion more than a proof. The lawyer decides to let the public look. Let them become the mirror the camera couldn't be. Phones ring. Voices swear they know that posture, that gait, that shape of shoulder. The calls that matter come from people who work in the quiet universe of numbers and rules. People who have seen Eddie at conferences and in hallways where randomness dresses in policy. His name rises through the static like a buoy through fog. The young attorney writes it down. Others do too. He feels it before he notices it, a shift in the air, the way a barometer tells a fisherman the weather on a calm morning. The calls he gets from an old friend are a little tighter, the pauses longer, the laughter trimmed to its edges. He scrolls his phone and counts the dates around Christmases past, around a November evening, around the ordinary Saturdays he once opened like any other door. A detective's patience is a river. It finds a way. When the video breathes into the world and a dozen familiar voices whisper his name, he understands that chance has turned its face toward him and that the odds he once bent are bending back. The call comes on an ordinary morning and turns ordinary into glass. Eddie is at his desk. The same chair, the same soft glow of monitors, when a supervisor steps in with the careful smile people use when they are not sure where a conversation will land. There's some old footage in the news, he says lightly, just a store camera from years ago. Strange, right? People think they recognize someone. He lingers in the doorway a beat too long, as if waiting for a tell that never arrives. Eddie nods, keeps his mouth in the gentle curve of a worker's calm, and returns his eyes to code that suddenly feels loud. The video is a trick of angles and distance. The hoodie's shadow performs most of the work. Still, recognition is a stubborn thing. Once it grips, it does not let go. Names have begun to collect in a ledger outside his view. Names of colleagues and far-flung technicians who claim they know that way of standing, that efficient stillness at a counter, the brief turn of a wrist when change is counted and folded. The investigation, which once felt like weather passing through another county, is now a pattern of footprints, moist and recent on the floor, just beyond his door. He thinks of the numbers again, the dates, the times, the narrow windows that made a continent of odds feel suddenly navigable. He thinks of how the code did not shout. It simply waited inside the system like a forgotten stanza, humming only on nights when the calendar tilted just right and the hour hand slid past evening's shoulder. He wants to believe it was a victimless architecture. Money destined to be won was won. The world did not tilt off its axis. Yet even in that soft argument, he hears the tremor. Trust is invisible until it breaks. Agents visit with courteous resolve. They ask where he was that December, who he spoke with, why his phone shows little bursts of conversation with an old friend in Texas. He answers with the precision of a man familiar with logs and audit trails. The words feel fine-grained and reasonable in the room, but each syllable sinks in air that is different now. He signs the visitor log when they arrive, watches them sign when they leave. Everything leaves a mark. At home, the theater screen becomes a dim mirror. He sits in a darkness he designed and listens to the faint machinery of air moving through vents. He tries to imagine a future that keeps moving forward as if nothing has turned. Instead, memory crossfades with the present. The glass room and its humming, the maintenance ticket and the clock adjustment, the drive through frost, the bell above a convenience store door. He tells himself he has been careful. He reminds himself that care and control are not the same word. An arrest is a calendar event no one writes down. It happens at the edge of a workday, light flattening across winter lawns, his name called with that mix of kindness and iron that professionals learn. He experiences the moment as if from the back row of his own life. There are instructions and hands and the relief of structure, oddly enough. The way a process, even a process against you, can feel almost comforting because it is clear about what happens next. He notes the thought and is startled by its calm. The courtroom paints him in stripes of fluorescent light. A jury listens. 12 lives interrupted by a stranger's story. The state speaks of access and opportunity, and the audacity of a man who could write the instructions that governed chance, and then choose the nights when chance would become a familiar. They describe phone calls and shell companies with names that sound like misprints, and lawyers who arrive with hours left on a one-year clock, and new reasons to avoid the one rule the lottery will not bend. Show your face. They talk about surveillance settings adjusted to capture only a breath each minute. They play a recording of a clerk's voice offering a thanks declined. The puzzle is assembled in public, while he sits with his hands folded to keep them still. His attorney plants questions like stakes in soft ground. How can anyone prove a self-erasing instruction existed if its design was to vanish? Where is the smoking gun? The line of code pulled from a machine? The neat confession written in the language of systems? A random number generator is a black box by design, he argues, and randomness does not leave confessions in its wake. The defense produces a brother who insists the man in the grainy video cannot be Eddie for a reason. So human it almost embarrasses the room. The shopper bought 2 hot dogs, and that's not his brother's taste. Laughter lifts like static, quickly controlled. The verdict arrives with the finality of a door closing. Eddie listens to the words and registers the way they land in his chest. Heavy, but not unexpected. 10 years, the judge says, with the courtly regret of a man issuing a sentence to someone who could have used his gifts for something else. Eddie nods, a small motion, and feels the floor hold steady beneath his shoes. He is allowed to walk out on bond while the law considers the calendar and the limits of time. In that window, he tastes daylight again and keeps to quiet rooms. Then a second door opens in the distance, and its hinge squeals like a revelation. A call finds a prosecutor with a Texas twang and an old memory. Did anyone mention that Eddie's brother once held a winning ticket far from Iowa, long before the video of the hoodie man? The detail seems almost comic in the telling. A fall from a tall tree while chasing a legend in the woods, but the ticket is no myth. Paper meets date. The win is real. One oddity is curio, 2 is a pattern. Patterns make investigators lean inward. The circle widens. Old drawings stir from sleep. States compare notes not with the bored tolerance they once had, but with a new attention sharpened by embarrassment and curiosity. Names that bobbed on the surface years ago now sink and connect in the silt. A friend in Wisconsin, a girlfriend in Kansas, another connection in Oklahoma, a cousin of a close friend's nephew across a border of convenience. Dates repeat like a code word. November's late breath, December's last days, May with its lengthening light. The same evenings, the same clocks lean, the same improbable fortunes falling in a narrow, precise reign. And then another turn. In Wisconsin, the machines from those nights were not discarded but stored, tidy as if waiting for a second purpose. For the first time, the investigation holds not just suspicion, but hardware, a way to look back at a machine as it was, to listen to the little song it sang under the melody the world heard. The room where those machines are examined is not so different from the glass room Eddie once kept. Bright, methodical, devout in its own way. But now the devotion is to disassembly. A narrative takes shape from the quiet parts. The software checks its date and asks the clock a private question. Is it one of the 3 nights? Is it one of the 2 sacred days? Has the evening crossed the line into the hour when few people are looking? If yes, the program invites a different choir to sing the numbers. Not a single outcome, but a narrowed field. A pasture fenced so neatly that the animal is almost certain to graze where you point. If no, the orchestra plays the national anthem of chance, untampered and loud. He sits in a small room while this is explained elsewhere to people who have never met him. A confession does not arrive as thunder. It arrives like rain that has been gathering all day, softly at first, and then steady enough to change the smell of the air. He hears himself say the words he once promised himself he would never need to say. He speaks the origin story as if describing someone else's impulse, the stray comment in a hallway about test numbers, the way an idle thought can become a blueprint if left in the mind of a person who knows exactly where the seams of a system are. He names friends who trusted him, not with their secrets, but with their silence. He speaks, and the room writes. On the day of sentencing, he chooses to stand and look at the judge and say he is sorry. The word is small compared to the architecture of the past years, but it is the only word that fits in the space they have given him. The judge answers with a sentence measured in decades, and with the odd mercy of acknowledging intelligence as a gift that deserved a different life. Eddie nods. He has always understood measurements, but endings are tidy only in books people do not read twice. Time, which once worked like an accomplice when the calendar and the clock aligned, now works in his favor. Appeals are technical creatures that do not care about the heat of a headline. The statute of limitations breathes on a detail, and the old verdict exhales into absence. It is not absolution, it is arithmetic. He steps out into air that smells like a middle season and returns to a life smaller than the mansion he once wandered. The peace does not hold. A door in Texas opens, and with it, a corridor lined with winds that resemble one another too closely to be coincidence. Investigators who once sought a single man in a hoodie now hold a thread that keeps finding new cloth. The pattern does not just implicate a night in Iowa, it sketches a decade across the map, states joined by the silent logic of code and friendship and the dangerous belief that the dance of chance can be choreographed without consequences. He thinks, not for the first time, about the moment in the glass room when the cursor blinked and his idea felt like a question asked in a whisper. Every story about control is also a story about surrender. He expected numbers to obey him. He did not expect time to keep receipts. Somewhere, a storage door rolls up, and a machine that once sang on a winter night wakes to tell what it remembers. Somewhere else, a prosecutor smooths a sheet of paper and writes down 3 dates that mean nothing to most people and everything to a select few. In a small room, a man who understands systems stares at his hands and knows that the pattern he convinced himself was invisible has finally learned how to be seen. The room where the evidence is now studied has the stillness of a chapel. Technicians lean over machines pulled from storage, their hands gloved, their breaths careful, as if disturbing dust might erase the truth that lies dormant in circuits. What they find is not a dramatic sabotage, no shredded wire or hacked panel. Instead, they uncover a quiet instruction hidden within layers of code, waiting for a date, an hour, a condition so specific it feels like superstition. May 27th, November 23rd. December 29th. Only those nights, only at the right moment. Otherwise, the system behaves like the faithful servant it was meant to be. The realization carries a chill. This was not brute force. This was elegance. Eddie had narrowed chaos into something that could be predicted, not every time, not too often, but enough to turn a 1 in millions dream into a probability as tame as a coin toss. He had written fate into a machine and watched it perform like a trick only he could see. And the names tied to those dates spill out with embarrassing neatness. A friend in Wisconsin with a sudden windfall. A woman he once dated in Kansas who collected a prize that sounded like a joke written into her surname. A nephew of an old hunting partner's friend in Oklahoma, each one a stone in the path back to him. Coincidence has limits, and here those limits snapped like overstretched thread. Investigators move with a patience sharpened by vindication. They know the outline now. What remains is confession, and confession requires a moment when denial is more exhausting than truth. Eddie finds himself in a room smaller than the glass chamber he once commanded. He is no longer the guardian of randomness. He is the anomaly it produced. When he speaks, his words arrive in an even tone, the way a programmer might describe a line of logic to a colleague. He explains the comment from an accountant, an offhand remark that planted the seed. He describes the code, the way it asked the calendar questions, the way it erased itself after serving its purpose. He names the people he trusted to play the roles he couldn't. There is no drama in his voice, no pride, just the inevitability of a story finally spoken aloud. The courtroom listens again, this time not to arguments or speculation but to his own admission. He tells them he regrets it. He tells them he is sorry. The judge, with a face carved by years of listening to men at crossroads, acknowledges Eddie's brilliance and laments the use he found for it. 25 years, the gavel says, with restitution stretching into millions. The sentence is not just about theft, it is about betrayal of belief itself. But Eddie has always known systems better than people. He understands how law is bound by time, the way code is bound by syntax, and appeal finds air where there should be none. The statute of limitations closes its hand over the conviction and squeezes until the verdict crumbles. He steps into the world again, not free of suspicion, not free of history, but free enough to breathe air without bars. For a while, he imagines it might end there, with time as his unlikely accomplice. Yet stories rarely honor the comfort of half-endings. A call from Texas reminds prosecutors of a brother, a ticket, a jackpot won years before Iowa, before the hoodie, before the quick-trip camera blinked awake. The pattern is older than anyone guessed. The circle, once small, grows wide, and its center points the same direction every time. Investigators sift through old wins, chasing echoes of the same 3 dates, the same narrowed randomness, the same faint fingerprints of design. And there, in Wisconsin's stored machines, they find the code itself, preserved like a fossil that tells the story of an animal long extinct but undeniable. With that, conjecture becomes certainty, and the scheme that once thrived on silence is written into history's record with ink that will not fade. Eddie once believed randomness was a myth men clung to because they feared the machinery of chance. Now, facing the machinery of justice, he understands that unpredictability has always had one defender he could never write out of the code: time itself. And time, at last, has turned against him. The trial does not end with the confession alone. Courts demand ritual. Witnesses must speak, attorneys must argue, and the evidence must be walked through as if the jury were children in a museum being guided past exhibits. The prosecutors present their case with steady hands, constructing the picture piece by piece. The convenience store footage, the audio of a clerk's voice, the shell company registered under a name spelled wrong, the trust documents routed through Canada and New York. They summon charts that map out phone calls, lines of contact between Eddie and old friends who suddenly turned lucky on nights that should have belonged to chance. The defense pushes back where it can. They question the blurry footage, point out how grainy images bend truth. They remind the jury that no line of malicious code has been preserved, that the program which allegedly altered fate destroyed itself as intended, leaving only inference. They offer small, human details. Eddie's brother swearing the man on the tape cannot be him because Eddie never liked hot dogs. The claim draws laughter from corners of the room, a ripple that makes the defense's case feel thinner than air. The prosecution counters with the heart of the matter. Coincidence has limits. A man tasked with building the system that protects randomness has no business purchasing a ticket at all, let alone one that carries the winning numbers from his own machine. They describe the maze of false claimants, lawyers, and trusts stacked like mirrors meant to confuse the eye. They remind the jury of how the prize was nearly claimed in the final hours of the one-year deadline, then mysteriously withdrawn when it became clear a name would have to be revealed. Each piece by itself may look ordinary, but together they are a portrait of intention. The verdict is guilty. The sentence is 25 years. Eddie listens, nods once, and lets the words fall into the quiet part of him that has always understood consequences. He apologizes, softly, with a tremor that feels real, though no apology can rewind the trust he dismantled. The judge acknowledges his intelligence, as if brilliance were a double-edged sword he chose to wield in the wrong direction. Prison is not designed for men who live in code. Its noise is constant, its rules blunt. Eddie, who once slipped instructions into the silence of machines, finds himself subject to the crude logic of cell doors and head counts. The other inmates know his story. In a world where most claim innocence, his guilt is famous, broadcast on evening news and whispered through gossip. He becomes a strange kind of celebrity, mocked by some, envied by others, tested by many. His money buys him small comforts, extra food, snacks, but even those turn to fuel for ridicule. Prison respects strength and silence. Intelligence is just another reason to be noticed. He serves not decades, but 5 years. Appeals and calculations trim his time the way a programmer prunes unnecessary lines of code. He walks free in 2022 into Texas heat, where fields spread under the sun like a horizon that promises anonymity. He settles in a modest home on acres of land where trees sway, where the air is heavy with cicadas instead of suspicion. Neighbors know his name, nod at him in town, but keep their distance. They know the story too well, and yet in small communities, even infamy softens into routine. Reporters try to reach him, calling, writing, knocking. He does not answer. The man who once built doors into systems now builds walls around himself. His silence is not arrogance, it is survival, and yet the shadow of what he did never leaves. Investigators continue to wonder how many jackpots passed through his invisible hands before he was caught. Could there have been more? Could he have sold the method to others? Was his scheme ever truly contained? The questions outlive the trial, like echoes in a room long after the music has stopped. Eddie Tipton remains, to some, a villain who violated public trust. To others, he is a man who made one audacious choice and then stumbled deeper into its consequences than he ever imagined. Some even defend him, describing him as generous, kind, incapable of cruelty, someone who simply could not resist testing the limits of his own mind against the system he helped build. The irony lingers. In trying to prove that randomness could be bent to his will, he proved the opposite. Randomness will always find its way back. A camera will capture a shadow. A storage room will preserve a machine. A date will repeat too many times to be ignored. In the end, the very thing he tried to master, chance, delivered him into the hands of justice. And as the lottery commissions across the country tighten their security, add layers of oversight, and teach themselves never again to trust blindly in the silence of a computer, the world remembers Eddie Tipton not for the brilliance of his code, but for the flaw in his design, believing that fate can be rewritten without leaving fingerprints. The courtroom has long been emptied, the headlines have faded, and yet Eddie Tipton's name still stirs unease in the lottery industry. His story did not vanish when he walked out of prison gates after 5 years. If anything, it lingered, a reminder etched into the bones of an institution that once believed itself unbreakable. In the quiet aftermath, investigators replay the case in their minds. They remember how close the scheme came to succeeding, how the $16.5 million ticket nearly slipped into the hands of an anonymous trust, how legal maneuvers nearly convinced officials to pay out without a face. They remember how many times the investigation almost went cold, abandoned as too complex, too distant, too small for federal attention. What saved it in the end was persistence, a handful of people who refused to let coincidence write the final chapter. For the public, the scandal raised an unsettling question. If the very man trusted to secure the system could bend it, what faith remained in the fairness of chance? State lotteries had long been marketed as a dream accessible to all, a simple ticket promising equality and possibility. Eddie's crime cracked that illusion. If luck could be hacked, what else could be tampered with? Officials responded with sweeping reforms. The machines once kept in glass rooms were upgraded, their code reviewed with fresh suspicion. Surveillance became relentless, no longer recording just snippets but hours of unbroken footage. Independent auditors were invited where once only insiders walked. Randomness had to be defended, not assumed. Each drawing became not just a spectacle of numbers, but a demonstration of trust rebuilt. Yet even as security hardened, the story of Eddie Tipton became almost mythic. To some, he was a cautionary tale about greed. To others, he was proof that intelligence without restraint becomes its own downfall. And among his friends and colleagues, the memory was more complicated. Many insisted he was no monster, just a man who let curiosity slip into conspiracy, who convinced himself that because a jackpot was destined for someone, it might as well go to a name he chose. Former co-workers recalled his warmth, his charisma, his generosity. They spoke of how he laughed easily, how he treated strangers like old companions, how he dreamed of being a father one day. It was difficult to reconcile that man with the mastermind who quietly rewrote code to steer millions of dollars. The duality unsettled them. Could someone be both? The kind-hearted friend and the architect of the largest lottery fraud in American history. In Texas, where he now lives in near seclusion, neighbors see a quiet man who keeps to himself. He is polite, even friendly in passing, but offers no invitation for conversation beyond the surface. When journalists approach, he turns them away or remains silent. For him, the only path forward seems to be distance. Distance from the life he once led, from the reputation that follows, from the questions that will never truly stop. And still, the questions remain. How many jackpots slipped through undetected? Did his code, self-erasing and elegant, touch more drawings than investigators ever proved? Could copies of it exist, tucked away by others who learned from him? The odds of winning the lottery remain astronomical, but for years he made those odds bend like a branch in the wind. The irony is sharp. In seeking to control the chance, Eddie surrendered to it. A single slip, a single recording, a single tip from someone who recognized his shape in grainy footage. That was all it took to unravel the architecture he believed was invisible. Randomness had the final say, after all. And so his story closes not with triumph or ruin alone, but with a reminder whispered through every lottery drawing that follows. No system is flawless, no safeguard immune to human ambition, and no secret can remain buried forever. Eddie Tipton's name is spoken now in auditoriums where new employees of lottery commissions are trained. His story is taught as warning, as legend, as proof that trust can never be left unguarded. His legacy is not wealth or freedom, but vigilance. The jackpots still rise, the tickets still sell, the dream endures, even after one man showed the world how fragile it truly was. History has no shortage of schemes that rattled faith in institutions. The lottery fraud engineered by Eddie Tipton now sits among them, not for the sheer violence of the crime, but for the audacity of its subtlety. Unlike robberies with guns or embezzlement siphoned over years, his crime was written in code, silent, almost invisible, leaving behind no fingerprints but the patterns of improbability. Comparisons were soon drawn to other scandals. The infamous 1980 Pennsylvania lottery scam, where conspirators weighted ping-pong balls so only certain numbers could rise, was one of the most notorious before Tipton. That crime inspired films, novels, and endless retellings, but its methods were crude, its footprint obvious. Eddie's crime was something else entirely. Invisible sabotage, hidden inside the very architecture designed to prevent tampering. It was not just cheating, it was betrayal from within. In the 1990s, Italy's national lottery was tainted when officials manipulated number drawings using children as unsuspecting participants. In Britain, an employee once attempted to claim a prize with a forged ticket, ending in disgrace and tragedy. Each case chipped away at trust, but none rivaled the reach and sophistication of Eddie's quiet rewrite of randomness. His scheme stretched across states, years, and jackpots, an infection inside the bloodstream of chance. For investigators, his story became an emblem of modern crime. Not brute force, but knowledge. Not storming the vault, but designing the lock. His tools were not weapons, but instructions. And yet, like all frauds, his undoing came not from brilliance, but from mistakes, repetition, arrogance, and the belief that patterns would remain invisible. History reminds us that every cheat leaves echoes. Eventually, someone listens. The public, however, absorbed the story differently. Some were fascinated, even admiring of the intellect it must have taken to rewrite odds stacked at 300 million to 1. Others were outraged, not just at the crime, but at the quiet way it attempted to rob people of hope. For the poor, the desperate, the dreamers who bought tickets week after week, the lottery was not numbers, but belief. Eddie had stolen not just money, but the illusion that everyone had the same chance. In seminars and university courses on ethics, his name began to appear alongside Enron executives, Ponzi schemers, and famous hackers who once bent systems to their will. The lesson was the same. Trust is fragile, and intelligence without restraint can become destruction. His fraud was not measured only in dollars lost, but in faith shaken. Even those closest to him were forced into reckoning. Friends who once spoke of his kindness, his generosity, his charm, struggled to reconcile the man they loved with the scandal that bore his name. Some clung to the memory of his warmth, insisting he was more than his crime. Others quietly turned away, unwilling to live in the shadow of a story that had become larger than any individual friendship. And Eddie himself? Silence. He has chosen not to explain, not to narrate, not to defend. Perhaps he knows that any attempt would sound like rationalization. Perhaps he understands that his story is no longer his to tell. It belongs to history, to investigators, to journalists, to the people who buy tickets believing in numbers, untainted by human ambition. The legacy of Eddie Tipton is not wealth, not even the infamy of a criminal mastermind, but a scar carved into the foundation of an American institution. Every ticket sold now carries, alongside its promise of fortune, the faint reminder that once, the odds were bent by a man trusted to keep them pure. And in that reminder lies the final truth. No matter how sophisticated the scheme, no matter how brilliant the architect, betrayal always leaves a trace. When the verdict was read and Eddie Tipton's confession spread across headlines, the lottery industry found itself staring into a mirror it did not want to see. The fraud was not just the act of one man. It was proof that the fortress of trust built around the numbers had cracks. The illusion of invulnerability had been shattered, and now it had to be rebuilt. Piece by piece. Across America, lottery commissions convened emergency meetings. Security officers, auditors, and technology consultants filled conference rooms once used for marketing campaigns and promotional planning. The agenda was no longer about selling hope, it was about preserving it. They had to ask difficult questions. How many other systems could be compromised? How many other insiders had the opportunity Eddie once had? The changes came quickly. Surveillance, once perfunctory, became relentless. Cameras that had recorded just fragments of time now captured every second. Access logs were no longer scribbled on clipboards, but tracked digitally, down to the millisecond. Independent observers were stationed in draw rooms, their role no longer ceremonial, but critical. No one would be left alone with the machine that chose the winning numbers. The random number generators themselves were redesigned. Layers of redundancy were introduced, multiple machines running simultaneous draws, with results compared before any number could be declared official. Independent code reviews became standard, with outside experts combing through software that once only a handful of insiders had ever seen. In some states, commissions abandoned computer-based draws entirely, returning to the old spectacle of bouncing balls in clear chambers, visible proof of randomness. Even the culture within the lottery industry shifted. Where once employees saw themselves as administrators of a harmless game, they now recognized the immense responsibility of guarding billions of dollars in public trust. Training programs included lessons on Tipton's fraud, presented as a cautionary tale. His name became shorthand for betrayal, a reminder that even the most trusted can falter. And yet, despite the reforms, suspicion lingered. Players continued to buy tickets, but some did so with a shadow in their hearts. Could the numbers truly be random? Could another Eddie be waiting, somewhere inside another system, with a new method invisible to the eye? For every improvement, for every tightened safeguard, there remained the uncomfortable truth that no system is ever perfect. For the investigators who cracked the case, the aftermath was bittersweet. They had exposed one of the largest lottery scams in history, but they knew they had not answered every question. How many jackpots had truly been manipulated? Were there others beyond those proven in court? Did Tipton ever share his methods with someone capable of continuing the scheme in silence? The legacy of Eddie's crime was not just new locks and cameras, it was vigilance. The industry could never again afford the comfort of assuming its systems were beyond corruption. The dream it sold to millions of players each week depended not only on chance, but on the certainty that chance was fair. That certainty had been shaken, and rebuilding it would take years. Still, the jackpots continued. Advertisements still promised life-changing fortune. People still lined up at convenience stores, clutching their slips of paper with hope pressed between their fingers. The scandal had left a scar, but it had not killed the dream. And somewhere in Texas, Eddie Tipton lived quietly, watching from the distance as an entire industry reshaped itself in the shadow of his choices. Freedom, when it came, was quieter than Eddie Tipton expected. No crowds, no reporters waiting at the gate, just the clank of a door, the shuffle of papers, and the stretch of open sky above Texas soil. 5 years in prison had reduced a 25-year sentence to something survivable, and Eddie stepped into a world that had already moved on. The scandal that once filled headlines was now an archive, a cautionary lecture, a name murmured in training sessions for lottery officials. He settled in a modest home on 55 acres near Flatonia, Texas, a patch of land where the air is heavy with cicadas in the summer, and neighbors measure distance in fields, not in fences. To the people in town, Eddie became another familiar figure, someone they might see buying feed or nodding politely at the gas station. Few approached him, though all knew his name. His story had traveled faster than he ever could. Reporters tried to draw him out. Letters were sent. Calls were made. Once or twice, cameras drove down dusty roads looking for a glimpse. Each time, Eddie stayed silent. He had spoken enough in court. He had confessed in detail how he rewrote randomness, how he gave numbers to friends who later passed them through a chain of lawyers and trusts. He had explained his regrets before a judge. Beyond that, he owed no one his voice. Silence became his armor. To those who once called him a friend, it was both painful and understandable. Some still defended him, recalling his generosity, his warmth, the charisma that once made him the center of any room. They described a man who loved board games, who dreamed of being a father, who gave freely to others. They could not reconcile that person with the architect of the most infamous lottery fraud in America. Others, disillusioned, cut ties altogether, unwilling to live beneath the long shadow of betrayal. For Eddie himself, the days became steady. He no longer lived in the mansion with its basketball court and private theater. His world now was quieter, more ordinary. Mornings on the porch, chores around the property, evenings where the only hum was of insects in the dark. The man who once manipulated millions now tended to the small and the simple. And yet, whispers of doubt followed him. Investigators and lottery officials wondered aloud. Had every manipulated jackpot been uncovered? Could there have been more, hidden so well they would never be traced? Was it possible Eddie had sold his knowledge, passed his method to someone else who now carried on the scheme in silence? The questions had no answers, and perhaps that was the most unsettling truth of all. To the wider world, Eddie Tipton had become a strange figure, part criminal, part cautionary tale, part myth. His story was told alongside legendary scams, not for its violence, but for its elegance and audacity. He had not stormed vaults or threatened clerks. He had rewritten the instructions of fate, and in doing so, reminded the world that even chance is vulnerable. In Flatonia, his neighbors saw none of this myth. To them, he was just Eddie, a man who kept to himself, who carried a past too heavy to be discussed openly. They nodded politely, spoke of the weather, and left the rest alone. The man who once whispered to machines now lived in the silence he created. And perhaps that was his final sentence. Not prison bars, not headlines, but the knowledge that the system he betrayed had reshaped itself forever in his shadow. America has always been captivated by stories of fraud. Bankers who manipulate markets, swindlers who promise fortunes, hackers who pry into vaults of data. The nation tells these tales again and again, half in outrage and half in fascination. Eddie Tipton's story belongs to that lineage, not because of bloodshed or violence, but because he dared to tamper with something people believed was untouchable, luck itself. What made his crime unforgettable was not the amount stolen, though millions passed through his scheme, but the intimacy of the betrayal. The lottery was supposed to be the one place where every player stood on equal ground, a dollar and a dream, nothing more, nothing less. For decades, the numbers rolling out of machines or glowing from screens carried the weight of fairness. Eddie's fraud cracked that belief. If randomness could be engineered, then fairness was only an illusion. And yet, society could not look away. His tale was repeated in documentaries, news specials, and countless articles. People leaned in, not just to condemn, but to understand. How did he do it? How did he nearly get away with it? Could anyone else try again? These were not just questions of justice. They were questions of human nature. Americans have long been drawn to the figure who beats the odds by wit rather than by chance. The outlaw, the trickster, the cheat. They are condemned, yes, but they are also remembered. For investigators, Eddie's name became a benchmark. For lottery officials, his scheme became a lesson in vigilance. For the public, he became a story to tell when scratching a ticket or dreaming about jackpots. And for history, he became proof that no system, however sacred, is immune to corruption from within. Years have passed since Eddie Tipton walked out of prison. He lives quietly now, far from the glass-walled room where he once whispered instructions to machines. His life is smaller, but not erased. The fields of Texas do not care about his past. The seasons still turn, the cicadas still sing. But his story lingers. In auditoriums where new lottery employees are trained, his name is invoked as warning. In conversations between players, his crime is remembered with equal parts anger and awe. For the industry, his scheme forced change, stronger security, stricter oversight, new ways of protecting randomness. For the public, it left a scar, faint but permanent, on the dream of winning. And yet, people still play. They still stand in line at convenience stores, still fold their tickets into wallets, still whisper wishes into the quiet space between numbers. The jackpots grow, the billboards shine, and hope sells as strongly as ever. Eddie Tipton may have shaken trust, but he did not kill the dream. That is the irony of his legacy. He showed the world that chance can be bent, but in doing so, he reminded everyone how fiercely they cling to the idea that chance is pure. His fraud reshaped an industry, rewrote security, and entered history books. But it did not stop a single player from believing that maybe, just maybe, tomorrow's numbers might belong to them. In the end, Eddie Tipton is remembered not just as the man who beat the odds, but as the man who proved that even odds can be deceived. His story stands as both a warning and a reflection of human brilliance, human weakness, and the endless tension between luck and control. The jackpots will keep rising, the tickets will keep selling. And somewhere in every drawing, silent but unforgotten, is the shadow of the man who once tried to rewrite the laws of chance.